Ezekiel turned the plug off for the fuel pump. He walked away and tried to get the timing right, and all of a sudden when I cranked it, because there was no fuel, it finally had the correct volume amount of air to fuel ratio and ignited for just a couple of seconds. So it gave me a hint like, oh shit.
AE86 to do for me. This is for me to do. So you highlighted the things that he wants. So let's just take a look here.
Is this too unreasonable?
Yeah, it depends. Let's go through it. So first ask is set the injectors to 240 cc. That's pretty important and also pretty easy to do. So we went and made that change there. You'll know there's something wrong with the scaling when you're doing the fuel table. If you run out of like adjustment range, then you'll know something's seriously wrong. Because usually if the injectors are sized correctly and the rest of your setups are correctly, idle will be kind of on the lower end of the scale, full throttle will be on the higher end of the scale. But if you have something seriously wrong, you'll know, because at idle you might have like half the fuel adjustment range at idle. You won't have any more at up high, or vice versa. So so far it's looking okay. I think the goal for me right now is I'm trying to get this thing just, I like to just try to get things just running and driving and then evaluate from there. As you guys know, I'm a lot more familiar with hull tech, so there's like there's some things in the software I have to get used to. So I kind of just want to get a feel for how things are working first. And then the next ask was calculate the injector dead time. That one is not as simple, and I haven't done it in a long time. So I took a look at the graph. It looks like other graphs I've seen online. I'm hoping to just leave that alone unless we know that there's some issue. Like we might, after we've done some tuning, I might find like, okay, this is not behaving. I've set up everything else the way I normally do, but the fueling is not behaving correctly. Then we might take a look at the injector dead time. Also, you want to see the cold tune and the cold idle speed. We won't be able to do this today because the first thing we have to do is get this thing to run like well once it's warmed up. And then after you got that set up, then you go back and you adjust the cold start. Because if you mess around the cold start, ahead of time, it will impact your hot map. So we want to get the hot map set up first, and then we'll do the cold start. Next one is set the idle to 1,000 to 1,200 RPM. I just enabled the idle control on here, and I just set it to have, this is very rough of course, but I set it to have your idle be 1,300 as the engine's like warming up, and at some point it'll drop down to 800. This we'll smooth this out once it's running. But when I first started the car, while you guys are doing the photo shoot, I got to idle, but it was idling at like 500 RPM. It was just like loping. And I went and set this up. It didn't do anything. So there was some other menu where it was just like a 0 to 100 scale. I didn't really know what it did, but I just increased that value and eventually idle it up.
Sorry, now that we're thinking of it, the aux output for idle air control. Yeah, I think Mark had it at like 26. So like he says it sucks because sometimes the Ford IAC works between a range. Sometimes it's different. I guess there's a lot of like...
Oh, there's some tuning to do basically?
Inconsistency in Ford IACs.
Okay.
Yeah, so he had it, whatever 26 means, he had it at 26. And he was like, yeah, if I try to set it higher, it idles too high. If I try to set it lower, then it doesn't want to idle anymore.
Oh, so actually I'm confused. So he got this thing to idle?
Yeah.
How come it's so rough when I got here? Is it different map?
Okay, so I guess this is why tuning is complicated, because yesterday, in order to set it for what Grant's doing right now, I not only synced all the throttles together, but then I also got it so the throttle plays...
you close the throttles a bit.
Yeah, I closed the throttle. So normally on a Gixxer motorcycle, it's pretty archaic. You just turn the screw and that's how you adjust your idle speed physically by the throttles. Now I have my throttles locked where I want to, so like just barely cracked open. And then now we have to play around with the idle air control valve and whatever dinner tables are over here.
Gotcha. We want us to kill the fuel pump when oil pressure is 0. That makes sense. Definitely I'd say that's an optional one. We'll get to that later. Add knock sensor functionality. Again, this will be later. This is kind of like the fine tuning, like end of like project phase is when you start to get that stuff set up. Maybe before your dyno appointment, especially before the track day. Water temp sensor is pegging right now. Might be a wiring issue, or maybe this is controlling it. I don't know, but we'll find out soon. And then rev limiter. So actually, when I first got here, I was just kind of messing with the throttle a little bit. And I was like, we should probably set the rev limiter, because if something gets hung, I don't want this thing to just blow up, right?
Oh.
So I went to go look and there's no rev limiter. I was like, okay, let's adjust that. So then Link lets you choose between a fueling or an ignition based like rev cut. So while you were out, I was kind of messing with the different like the different styles and like the different sounds it makes. So
I heard it.
Yeah. So right now it sounds like a two-step, which I think is pretty sick.
Yeah, I was worried. I was over in the corner. I heard da 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 da. I was like, dude, is he ringing it out already?
But yeah, that's the goal. So if we can get this car just running down the road and just driving under load and stuff, I'd be very happy with that. That'd be, in my opinion, that's a good like first step for a road tune. So.
Oh, awesome! Great.
Much later. Several days later.
Another late night, and huge. Once again, thank you. Save the day, bad boy Mark.
I mean, I just doing what I can, you know, just to help out. Been playing with ECUs for a while. You guys, if you listened to the podcast before, and we had a small talk about, you know, ECUs. Basically, was an information bomb, but you know, here is where I'm applying it. So it's kind of nice to see me being able to get his stuff running, and you know, at a condition that is drivable and streetable. So.
In the end, we're successful, but we did have a few more than teething issues. Let's talk about some of the issues we have.
Yeah, so one of the issues that we had was the throttles with the idle. And the reason why is because the Ford IAC valve is actually not a very good valve in my opinion. I've actually worked with about 3 or 4 of them now. Some idles are they're not consistent. So on my Beams car, I had a Ford IAC, but it would only work from about maybe 45% to about 60%, so it's a very small range. So if I try to fine tune adjust it, it would either shut or be too much. So it's not a very good idle valve. The problem we had on this motor was because the orifice is probably too small for it to pass enough air that goes through to keep the idle up. So when we set the idle duty cycle to about 50, 60, 80, it didn't really change it. But when I turned off the valve, brought the idle down, you could hear it noticeably, but it wasn't enough to actually make it do anything. So what I told Ezekiel to do is just to open up the throttle to get the throttle valve or the idle speed up to about 950, and to see if that would adjust it, you know, just a little bit. And unfortunately, it still didn't do much. So I'm gonna highly suggest for you guys, if you're, you know, getting into ECUs and all that, Ford IAC works for certain cars. You gotta make sure the orifice is big enough so that, and not to mention your vac manifold has to be big enough so you can draw that vacuum in. But it doesn't work as well for ITB cars. It might work better for, you know, a car that has a manifold, you know, like a Supra. Where for an ITB car, it's not as intuitive. The Volvo ones I've found, they work great. They usually work within a range of 25, 22 to about 60 or 70. And I had one on my my 4AG16 valve before I took it out, and I was able to adjust my my idle speed from like 700 to like 4,000. So it's a very good valve. It is bulky and it's big, but it works a lot better.
What Volvo does it come off of?
Like anything, to be honest.
Any Volvo?
Any
Okay.
old Volvo, like I've seen them on like 240 Volvos, the 240, the big
box.
giant box
The
ones,
brick.
you know?
The second, even more bigger problem, which is actually kind of my fault. What is it?
You guys using a T3 underdrive water pump pulley.
Wait, that's actually not what I was going to talk about.
Oh.
The wideband.
Oh! CAN bus is kind of cryptic. There's a lot of things about CAN bus that it literally needs its own topic of its own, or an own class of its own, because there's a lot about CAN bus on streams, data streams, big Indian, small little Indian, and CAN IDs, and kilobytes of seconds, and you know, all of that stuff. It's such a complicated topic. So our problem with the wideband is the wideband he bought is set up to be CAN bus protocol based on OBD2. OBD2 uses a completely different, basically, data stream. And the only way to change that data stream is if the firmware is changed. So there's some manufacturers that sell, CAN bus based dashes, and some of them have, you could use this for OBD2, but it also can be used for Link or Megasquirt or Haltech. You know, all of that stuff can be changed. But if you're going to use between OBD2 and a different CAN bus, which is the same 11-bit code that most ECUs use, you actually have to get the firmware changed or have to change the data in there, because you can't just change it. Now, unfortunately, because that CAN bus setting in the wideband is actually, well, it's stuck on OBD2. The only way is you buy a new wideband, or two, send it in, tell them to, hey, miraculously change the firmware out.
So, long way of me saying I made a big boo-boo and bought the wrong part number. You mentioned it earlier. I feel embarrassed now because I actually made 2 purchase mistakes.
No.
What's the second one, Mark? Let's point it out.
Well, the third one, right?
Oh, man.
Well, this pulley is a little bit oversized, and what that means, it drives it slower. So it drives the pulley pump slower. So now we were driving on the street, it would not go below like 108 or 205 Fahrenheit degrees. So it runs hot if you run an underdrive pulley. I guess you gotta be going stupid fast. I highly recommend you just stick with a stock one.
Yeah, a little more information. It's the T3 underdrive water pump pulley. I bought it for the bling pretty much. The unfortunate side effect is that, yeah, it's probably should be like a race only product. We were driving it pretty hard, and yeah, I couldn't get the temps under like 205, which is terrible for the street. Just from memory, like my normal temps was like 190-ish.
Yeah.
And so that's like 13 degrees more, and that was like the low. We saw like
212, 215.
yeah, at one point, and Mark was like, do we have to stop? I was like, no, just keep going.
But, you know, so far we got the engine tuned. The last thing we touched was acceleration enrichment. We went through the channels, you know, full throttle runs, low speed. It's really hard to tune on the street, or make it a street tune, or load tuning without a dyno, because you can't really, when you're tuning the fueling map, you can't stay in a certain section because there's no load against the engine when you're on the, I'm sorry, there's load in the engine, but it keeps going. With a dyno, you can keep a load in a specific area, tune that, you know, tune the table for that certain area, and then go on your way and move on to the next. But another thing was an issue is because we don't have the wideband hooked up, I can't data log. So we can't change, you know, the fueling map based on percentages because it was too much here, and the AFR table, we can't set it up because there's just wideband's not hooked up. So yeah, another thing also means is you can't set up EGO or exhaust gas oxygen correction, and there's also what they call closed loop exhaust gas correction or oxygen tuning. Basically, when you have your full map tuned and set up, you know, there will always be variances and changes based on how much fuel is getting injected in the motor. So what happens is if you have closed loop tuning or closed loop running for the exhaust gas correction, let's say you set the target map for 14.7, but here and there it starts to go up to 14.9 because in this map it's just slightly a little off. If you have closed loop, it will adjust it. So based on how much adjustment is done, that's all settings. But without a wideband, you can't do any of it. So yeah, man. I mean, but I'm glad you're ready for 8-6 day. Have fun. You full throttle runs, and you shouldn't blow anything up. That's what I'm saying. You should be safe.
So, let's see. Next steps. Next steps for me.
Oh shit! Next steps: new idle air control valve. That's number one.
Yeah, correct wide. Buy the correct wideband.
Yeah, buy the correct wideband. Sell the other wideband. I don't know. Somebody want to buy it? Ezekiel's got one for sale now. Change the pulley out. But after that, it's all about just settings and tuning. I think dyno tuning for the ignition timing is probably what's next, and that will probably be the end game of all, and then you should be ready for the track.
Awesome.
So that's your end goal, and you're almost there. So.
What was that one setting again where you let off? It's supposed to cut the fuel.
Oh, you guys, if you don't turn this on when you're off the throttle, it's called overrun fuel cut. If you don't set that off, if you're off the throttle, it's gonna keep dumping fuel no matter what you have in there. But if you turn that on, it cuts the fuel to basically zero because you're decelerating. You're not using any fuel. Your valves are closed. All that stuff. There's settings in there. It's almost all ECUs have it. Megasport has it. Haltech has it. Linky has it. It's a normal setting that that mimics what OEMs do or OEM ECUs do. You're off the throttle. Stop putting in gas. Bermuda Wire did a really good job on the wiring harness again, because when I called them and asked them, with CAN bus, this is probably one of the more important things. If you don't have a terminating resistor on your CAN bus network, it's not going to work. You need to have two, basically 120 ohm resistors at the ends, one for the high and one for the high and low that connects on one end, and then another high and low on the other side. And they both have to connect, and they're intertwisting pairs, right? So when you set that up, you got to make sure that you have those two at the end, or else I think the connection just doesn't work, or it doesn't like it, right? The AEM wideband that he bought does not have a terminating resistor. So Bermuda wire already planned for that. Thankfully, he already put a terminating resistor within the harness, so that saved us a lot of time. If we didn't put that in, we would have to basically cut open the wiring harness or wire it in somewhere. So props to you, guy. That was a great job. Getting the engine running though, that was that was a lot of fun. There was a lot of things about it. One of the things was Flows doesn't give. Okay, so Ezekiel's running a Flows crank trigger, and I asked him if there was any documentation, because the biggest thing is when you set up your trigger, you need to know the angle, right? I'm pretty sure Flows knows that there's some sort of angle that needs to be done, but the crank trigger only goes on one way. So we had to basically clock and count the amount of teeth that passes before it passes or after it passes the sensor, and then we had to input that as an angle into the computer. So that was number one. Number two, next problem was where the distributor for the tooth, because the distributor is being used as a cam sensor right now, which, you know, we had this conversation, we'd like to have it where it's somewhere hidden and not use the distributor to get rid of that, but right now the distributor works. The tooth passes by, that also needs to be indicated into the ECU. If you don't have that indicated, it doesn't know where to look for that tooth. So how many teeth does it pass before it touches that tooth after it passes top dead center? So, you know, you gotta know all those information, then you put that information in, then it should work. The problem that we had when we couldn't get it started, even though that was all set up and the timing was all great, it's because the injector sizes were wrong. And you know, this is just recapping what I think I did watch your video and you touched the base on it. If you have the wrong injector size, it's either going to be either too lean or too rich. What the problem was initially I feel that it was too rich. So it didn't want to start. It was just too much fuel, and the vapors didn't ignite because it was just too damp. So what happened was Ezekiel turned the plug off for the fuel pump. He walked away and tried to get the timing right, and all of a sudden when I cranked it, because there was no fuel, it finally had the correct volume amount of air to fuel ratio and ignited for just a couple of seconds. So it gave me a hint like, oh shit, so the timing is right, but the fueling is wrong. So, you know, things to look out when you're trying to do a first start on an engine. It's there's a lot of things to, you know, pay attention to. And
well, yeah, Mark, I just want to thank you so much again. Saved my ass on the first time we tried to start it, and also saved my ass again. All my mistakes, we got it to work.
I mean, they're not necessarily mistakes. It's, you know, trial and error. I mean, you can imagine if you go to my house, I have so many parts that I've bought and like, well, fuck, that didn't work. Oh fuck, I don't know what I'm going to do with this now. So it sits on a shelf, literally. I have like parts. I've thousands of dollars of parts just sitting on a shelf because I don't know what to do with it anymore because I bought the wrong thing. You know, it's kind of frustrating.
We've all been there.
You know, live and learn, right?
Yeah. Well, yeah, man, I just wanted to thank you so much again. Right in time for 8/6 day too, man.
Yeah, man. And, anytime.
Yeah. Hopefully, when I get this sorted, get some real dyno numbers, and then you can pick apart the tuner's work.
But for the most part, the hardest part again about getting an engine to tune is getting it started. Once you get it started, everything else is easy, because you know, when it comes to custom work like this, it makes a lot more work for, you know, someone who's not well versed in tuning or understanding how triggers work. So over time, this kind of information is learned, and you know, it requires a lot of reading and a lot of understanding how engines work and how triggers work. And if you guys have more questions, feel free to hit us up. That's the way it is.
Yeah, Mark, not me. Well, yeah, thanks again, man. I really appreciate it.
Man, no problem. So yeah, see you guys next time. I don't know. We always be around.
Happy 8/6 day.
Yeah, enjoy 8/6 day. Have fun. Drive safe. Don't crash.